Yeah, we may pick on Pickle a little bit today.
Welcome, everybody, to the next episode of the Display Skeptics, the March 2026 news edition. And for those people on Patreon, a follow-up to our micro LED versus LCOS engine. Here with Carl, we've got some exciting updates and maybe a deeper dive into one of the most recent announced AR glasses in the space, famous for how much they spent on their domain name.
Yeah. Yeah, we may pick on Pickle a little bit today.
These
Okay.
guys came across when we were at CES. They had just launched the Pickle One or whatever this hardware is supposed to be called. And they got big in the news cycle because of how much they spent on their domain name, reportedly $1.2 million just to buy pickle.com. Certainly great marketing, but that's a lot of startup money to burn just for a domain name.
I guess they wanted a cute name. I don't know if it mattered which one they got. That was the one that they could do. But yeah, it does seem kind of strange. They're also a Y Combinator startup. Basic information, nothing too spectacular. They're claiming 68 grams, a 12-hour battery life, a binocular this time. So they're pushing binocular. The yearly, they want a yearly plan though. They're going straight for rent seeking, as we might say. They're going straight to say, obviously the glasses are not enough. They need to have a yearly plan. They're really more claiming to be more of a OS company. They're trying to be a software play as well, and they use a Qualcomm Snapdragon, but so does everybody. And let's see what else. Yeah, our basic thoughts are that kind of summarizing, the 3D model concept of the curved waveguide is unlikely. The model,
a lot of these startups put only renderings on their website, and in most cases, when you don't have a finished product or any idea what that finished product will look like, you're going to have just one little example like we see on the Pickle website here on the right side of the screen. It shows just a projector arbitrarily injecting light into this curved lens that they have on a very sleek, looking piece of industrial designed glasses. But a lot of fishy questions came up out of this particular screen grab.
Yeah, this kind of little projector here suggests one of two things. You either got some kind of, to make this happen, if you were analyzing it, this would have to be something like a holographic mirror that would bend the light back towards the eye. Because if you just shoot it at like a reflective coating here, it would hit, the image would be in your nose. It would never get to the eye. But then later on, they're going to talk about waveguides. Well, this isn't how a waveguide would work. And this kind of looks like, as we said, this looks like maybe an Avagon projector, but it looks like an LCOS configuration. The whole thing looks LCOS.
Exactly.
From a configuration point of view, the kind of the depth of the engine and so forth. And they
shot a little video, and that brings up even more questions.
Yeah, the video doesn't agree with that. So, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And the CEO went on X, and I'm not sure he made his case or helped his case any, because one of the biggest things, we'll talk about that, is his dubious widest field of view claim. Because on their website it says widest field of view. No qualifiers, no of all-day wearable glasses or anything. None of that. Yeah. So this is what they put on their X post. So this is a straight copy from the website. So I copied this is what they say: widest field of view in the world. I didn't see any qualifiers on that. And then somebody, this guy Matthew, had taken him to task, and I guess in one of the forums had taken him to task over this. And then Daniel Park, who's the CEO of Pixel, posted this is straight copied from the post. And there was a lot of things due to NDA restrictions, which seems a little strange. Normally the system company is not the guy crying NDA restrictions. Normally when I hear NDA restrictions, it's from a component supplier to another company saying, boy, we can't tell you who we're used in because they won't let us. And
in your defense, right? This is not the death knell. There's definitely small companies who work with larger or more secretive component suppliers. I can imagine if they're talking with Loomis about their Z lenses, they probably want a mutual NDA between the two of them. But you're right. System guys typically are not the ones very restricted about talking about componentry. Component guys really want people to know about what they're making.
Yeah, and his argument is a little bit, I'll call it one from column A, one from column B. He'll say, well, I'll take the this from this capability, I'll take the weight from over here, and I'll take the image quality from over there, or whatever, the field of view. He's kind of like um, using Loomis for the field of view, but then saying he's going to use the weight from a waveguide, from a diffractive waveguide, and so
Right.
forth. So he mentioned several different things, but the big thing here is from widest field of view, it goes down to Pickle's 30-degree field of view is the highest among commercialized AR glasses. That's quite a step down from widest in the world.
Yeah.
So, our claim of widest field of view is based on commercialized daily use binocular waveguide AR glasses. Now, this is, I took this picture. I got to meet with Avagon at AR, VR, MR, and they showed me this 3D printed model. And when I saw this image, I said, boy, that looks awfully familiar. So this
Mhm.
tends to be looking like Avagon. However, I would add, this may be nothing like what they're actually doing. This could have been a guy cutting paste, got some information from Avagon, cut and pasted in because it met his criterion of how small it needed to be and whatnot.
Yep.
But of course, a pupil expanding waveguide doesn't kind of work like a projector. So this is just an artist rendition. So anyway, from the size and shape of the projector, everything here says LCOS. If it was an LED, it would be in different shape. Like if it was a
Mhm.
micro LEDs, if it's full color, it would be a more cubic, more of a cube
Right.
in there. So none of this stuff. This looks like it's an Avagon, like an Avagon LCOS projector.
Yeah,
Um,
micro OLED tends to be a lot. We see
yeah,
these in the 1D expanders that Inmo Air line has, and they tend to be a lot wider, or sorry,
right.
taller than they are wide.
Right. There's different ways, or a bird bath, or something else. There's lots
Yeah.
of other ways. Now they do kind of show this really curvy lens. Now I have seen these curvy. There's one or two things are going to happen. This lens is either going to be flatter because I don't think they're developing a curved waveguide. There are people trying to do that, but I haven't
Yeah.
seen anybody do it. I don't think some little startup with out of Y Combinator is doing a curved waveguide. And the other way to go is that you got a flat waveguide behind this the curvy image, and I've seen companies do that.
Yeah.
Um, let's look here. Now, this is a still picture in that video, and because it won't be tough. I probably should have shown the video, but getting that imported in and all that stuff would have been a task. So what I've done is I freeze framed several of the ones that showed the most kind of breakup.
Mhm.
What happens is your camera is running free. The camera of the phone, they say they're using an iPhone 15 Pro Max. The whatever the rate that the camera's reading at and the display rate are not synchronized. And so what's going to happen is when things move or change, you see things break up. Well, what I see when I look at this thing is I see something that looks a lot more like an OLED would behave to a camera than I see something that looks like it's LCOS.
Yeah.
So the problem is I don't know of any optical engine that can get an LCOS, an OLED that small,
Yeah.
with a 2D expanding pupil, because that thing's showing a really small exit area expanding out. And I've sort of grabbed various areas here. And one thing, as I said, because this sounded almost as I say, history doesn't repeat itself, but sometimes it rhymes a lot. He says and I'm also starting to work because of some of their other stuff. You start parsing their words pretty carefully.
Mhm.
You start saying, well, what is it? What words might be missed here? So it says an unedited video of our real prototype waveguide display. So we're going to have to wonder what that is. But this footage, this shows a cadaver, and they say that it was lowered intentionally. They lowered the brightness to reduce reflections, which doesn't make a lot of sense unless their optics are really bad. So to me, everything about this says it looks a lot more like they videoed OLED than field sequential LCOS. So let's go see here. Now, like I said, this kind of rhymes to me because Magic Leap in 2016 said this was shot through Magic Leap technology. Didn't say it was shot through what their actual device was going to be. So this
Yeah.
is a little more fuzzy wording. It turned out that likely this was a micro LED with birdbath optics. And we know later Magic Leap went on to try to sue Nreal for taking Magic Leap's technology. But Magic Leap, when they came out, wasn't using OLEDs and they weren't using bird bath, but Xreal was, or
Yep.
Nreal, they were. So I get the feeling that this is likely what this is. And you kind of see these ghosts. See how these ghosts here? They're not a. It's not a solid color. It's white. Even though you
Yeah.
see a white line, the white line stays a white line. It doesn't turn
Basically, it's
into.
a temporal artifact, but the
Yeah,
same color that you're getting.
yeah, same thing. Like there's two ways that you tend to see things with field sequential color. You tend to see, particularly if the field sequential color rate is low. This is a HoloLens 1 picture. You see with motion, you tend to get a red, like a color on each end. Like here, you see
Mhm.
red and blue and green kind of fringing off this more or less white thing that was up there. So that's a HoloLens 1. It had a very low frame rate. What I remember, I think it's only 60 frames per second, which is really red, green, blue ones. And that's an
Mhm.
awfully low rate. So color breakup is really bad. And then here's a video I took. I just took this yesterday of the. I took this of the Meta Ray Ban displays. You kind of see this kind of shimmer, the colors, how they're rotating through. Once again, this is a higher frame rate. It's 90 frames per second, and this was taken by their report, taken by the same camera as was taken by the Meta Ray Ban that they use. So if this was LCOS, I would expect to see some kind of shimmering, some kind of
Mhm.
stuff. As a matter, I took this in a fairly dark area because I know that tends to change what the camera effects will do. So there are differences because you can't really control things well. The iPhone will do, when you point it at things like these, you get different video effects when you shoot LCOS. But I've never seen a really clean image from an iPhone taking a picture of an LCOS display. You don't see it, by the way, I should emphasize, you don't see this with your eye. Your eye is not, that doesn't have the same shutter rate and stuff like that
Right.
of an iPhone camera. So yeah, as you talked about, there are some, one of my questions is maybe they're playing really loose with waveguides. They might even be calling whatever a bird bath is a waveguide for all I know.
Yeah.
But like for example, as you mentioned, MO Air 3 has a 1D reflective waveguide. This is a little bit similar to very old um, Loomis technology. But then also we have Google. We know Ant Reality was bought by Google, and this is basically, if you go back to my blog and look up Ant Reality, you'll see this is a design they had, and Google bought them. And Google at AR, VR, MR, the other presentation, they called it a compound light guide. And as best I can tell, it's exactly the same design
Yep.
that Xreal was calling a flat prism. And
It's
so,
their Project Aura, right?
yeah, I don't know. I mean, we know that they're friendly because obviously Xreal is tied in with Google on the whole Android XR. But
Mhm.
I've never gotten a really straight answer on this. They know I know you know, I knew them. I knew this design when it was with Ant Reality. And I reported on it at the time. But anyway, so it's kind of one of those funny things. But the point of all this relative to Pickle is that you do. I see a lot of liberties taken with the language of what constitutes a waveguide.
For all of the faults that we point out here, right? I feel like at least Daniel, the CEO, is trying to be transparent about what's happening back there. Trying, maybe not succeeding as much as they think they are, but trying. They post this through the lens video, which kind of leads me to believe that there is absolutely no bird bath happening there. You can actually see the top and the bottom of the frame in that video. And so there is some sort of lateral injection in here, whether it's a 1D waveguide, TBD. We'll talk about that another time. Then they start posting assumptions on power consumption and everything. That's why I believe that there's no way that this can be an OLED in final mass production, right? What they show on their site today and what actually makes it into the finished product could be two wildly different things, like we saw with Magic Leap. But they claim something like 300 milliwatts power consumption for a binocular device at max brightness that you can see out in the world. Even with this type of 1D expansion, the OLEDs are so much more inefficient than LCOS and micro LED that you're nowhere near 300 milliwatts. You're probably at least 3 to 5 times higher than that. So
That's something people don't get. I did this. I've done these numbers before too,
yeah,
and like people think about LCOS as power hungry or whatnot. I'm saying, well, if you're measuring nits, and the beauty of the thing we're doing with near eye displays, we're talking nits. I mean, LCOS is outputting for the same watt. For, you know, if you're going to put out a watt, I think LCOS is like 100 times more efficient at putting out nits, because what
Yeah.
happens is you can funnel those things into a small area. Very different if you're trying to do a projector, fill a screen and whatnot. But yeah, they're on different orders of magnitude, a couple of orders of magnitude difference in terms of the brightness you get out of LCOS in terms of nits. Yeah.
This one is a little bit more market focused. We've had a couple of news segments from both XReal and Viture in terms of big raises, but Viture is now back with another 100 million raise. I really wanted to put this on here because I think there's two main things happening here. One is these guys are getting big war chests. I think up until this point, both Viture and XReal have raised somewhere on the order of 200 to 300 million US dollars. A lot of money. And we're not even talking about Ray Neo, which plays in this display glass space that is basically fully funded by TCL.
They're in a different league.
That's going to be unlimited money if they show progress.
Yeah.
I think the key takeaway that I'm getting from all of these raises is that there's starting to be real money on the table, and they see this as an actual category that's growing sufficiently well compared to actual XR headsets, right? Like the Meta Quest, the Vision Pro, the Galaxy XR, that people are starting to put a bunch of money in here and starting to litigate, which are I would say, two big signs of more mature market status.
Maybe. I just don't think the market's big enough yet to be doing that level of litigation. I think maybe it's a matter of keeping them out of XReal, protecting their space before the fact. I don't think the fact is here yet. I don't think the market. Yeah. We're not talking markets measured in millions of units a year. We're talking markets still measured in hundreds of thousands. And XReal is by far, I think, the largest shipper of this stuff. They claim that, and I haven't heard anybody deny it either. So I think they are.
Next, I think we've got some privacy discussions that have come up. You want to take us off on this one, Carl?
Yeah, I actually got involved in some LinkedIn discussions. Scott Stein, who I got to pal around with a little bit at CES of CNET, he put up a post on both an article on it, which I've got a link to here, and on his on LinkedIn, he posted, the Meta smart glasses get facial recognition, and that worries me. And that's one level of problem that people are, the idea sounds really good. So it'd be great if I walked up at a conference and I could remember who is, do I know this person? They talk about kind of a name tagging, but you can imagine that you walk up to somebody, you facially recognize them, and all of a sudden you know who they are, what they are, why you know them, last time you met them, the whole thing. Just like you have a personal assistant. You may see, I don't know if you've ever seen Devil Wears Prada, but the movie there where Meryl Streep is being whispered in her ear who the person is walking up to him. Well, imagine if your glasses were doing that for you. So anyway, Scott's kind of talked about that and brings up some concerns. Avi Baraziv, who has been with a lot of companies, I think Apple, Amazon, I don't know if he's done Google or not, but it seemed like every company he's been with, he's been with a lot of companies, a lot of big name companies, and now he does his own consulting. But he's a bit of a privacy advocate. He's a good guy in that regard. And, his idea, which both is reasonable, but also probably not going to happen. I think even he probably would admit that it's sad. But he says, well, his idea was that, first of all, the ULEDs are just ridiculous. You basically buy a product, and if you want to use your own product, you've got to agree to the ULED, or else you can't use the product you just bought. But anyway, he says, he thought that, basically biometrics and stuff like that should be restricted to people who've agreed to share them with you. So the idea would be, if I could meet you at a conference, we like how we bump phones now and you share your info. Well, unless they're in your contact list or something else, you shouldn't be able to do it. I think it's a noble cause, but I'm a little afraid that people are basically sacrificing we're just seeing it, that people are sacrificing their privacy for convenience. And really what people are after, I think there's disconnectivity. What I want is these superhuman memory skills, right? Like, oh, where did I put my glasses, or where did I put that thing? I've got a camera lens I haven't been able to find, and it would be great if I could just say, where did I put that thing? And so if your glasses all the time were keeping track of where you're putting stuff and where you're doing stuff and who you know and whatnot, that'd be great. But then at the other side, but the problem is, and we'll get into the next one, is that the companies, and I think this includes Apple, is as good as Apple has a perception of being. I mean, I think these guys are after your data. They're after that information coming in the camera. In some ways, I think the big companies think that the information coming in through cameras is more valuable even than the images and stuff. They want to know what what the streets are looking like, all kinds of aggregated data. Even if it was purely innocent data aggregation, that's what they're after, and they maybe, and you could argue worse than that. But there's some side consequences of this, and this leads to an article that you found. And
Yeah.
I hesitate to put down the title because it makes it, when you sent that to me, I swore you were sent, it was a spam thing from somebody.
Yeah, I think both of
Title
us
is
chose
not in
not
here.
to engage with this article until I personally found it on Hacker News, right? And I generally, if it's shared there, it's a little bit more technical of an analysis of something. So I actually went through and read what SVD, what reporting they did on the Meta AI glasses and kind of the offline processing that happens to a lot of the data to be labeled for their individual AI and LLM training sessions or training models. It's pretty scary. I would recommend everybody goes on to this particular article and takes a look, especially if you have one of these glasses, and you should then go and update your meta choices. Whether or not that does anything, at least you'll have it in the app that you're not sharing your videos and
just to
pictures.
be clear, what they're doing, they say it's for training, and this is what this article talks about. They say these are from Sweden, but
Yeah,
basically they're what's going on is these videos are being shipped down. They say to basically a workshop in Kenya, and the Kenyans are getting the video feed in order to do AI training,
right.
whatever that means. But basically, you think what you thought it was just a computer looking at your naked photos, or you got out of the bathroom or whatever. According to them, they're seeing all kinds of stuff, and these humans are almost embarrassed. Being normal humans, they're embarrassed by some of what they're seeing. At least that's what the story talks about. So
Right.
anyway, it's a very concerning issue, and
I
this
think
is
this is a topic that will continue to come up as the segments grow. Right, Meta just reported that they've sold 7 million pairs of these camera glasses. I think that we're getting to a point where enough people have cameras perpetually on their face that we're getting into a situation similar to the Ring doorbell controversy from the Super Bowl this year, where you just have so much distributed surveillance now available, except this time it is completely at the behest of Meta. Whether I trust Meta more than Amazon is kind of immaterial to this question. You are publicly surveilling everyone around you when you're wearing these if you are not very, very careful about what permissions you are giving to your device. And even in that case, who knows what security researchers will find once they dig further and further into the actual data that's being shared.
and it's not just you; it's all the people around you.
Yeah.
But this could be an impediment to the whole market too, because that perception of, I mean, there are people who are, there are a lot of nut. There are also some really bad people the other way who will start ripping the glasses off your face and punching you out, whether or not you're recording or doing anything bad with it.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting issue. But
I'm
yeah,
sure we'll talk about it more at
this
AWE.
article really was an eye opener, particularly after I'd had this other discussion because I'd gone back and forth with the V. And in a related issue, talking about this is kind of the double-edged sword of AI. One of the things hitting us right now is the hardware costs are going up. I always say we've been spoiled because I always try to remind people, an Apple II adjusted for inflation would be like $5,000 today or something, or at least 3 to 5 thousand more than an Apple Vision Pro. And so, we're a little spoiled by the fact that costs have been driven down so long. from basically about 50, 60 years of semiconductor turning the crank, Moore's law, and all that stuff. We gotten kind of spoiled by how cheap things can get. But yeah, it's definitely going to affect this market because while we're touting the new AI capability, and we want that, we've got the double-edged sword side of that we just talked about.
Yeah.
And then, but right now, those AI companies are buying up semiconductors, they're buying up power. This is another big issue out there, but the semiconductor is really bad in terms of finding
Yeah.
components. Memory is bad, but processors are bad too. They're
Nothing
at
is
such a
safe.
scale that it's affecting the entire semiconductor market, which is interesting because like I say, I was when I was actually involved in the early days of synchronous DRAM that led to and before that the video RAM. And back then there was about 20, 30 companies making DRAM. We had a JDEC committee where we all had to agree on. Now there's only like 3 really large and really 4 if you include China. And China, that China company, there's a memory company in China I was just reading, might be
Yeah.
growing now because they may be the only guy providing DRAM for DRAM purposes.
Right.
But anyway, but yeah, the problem is they're soaking up all the capacity. So even if you don't think I'm not buying that kind of DRAM. Well, they're buying this other kind of DRAM, and that's soaking up all the wafers. And I'm not buying graphics chips. Well, the graphics chips are soaking up all the fab capability.
Yeah.
So there's all that going on, and that's going to also create consumer resentment. There's this resenting backlash, both for job security, but also people in the tech industry are getting really hacked off by the fact they can't buy electronic components
Yeah.
and stuff. So it's a little bit of a concerning time.
And especially in this space, right? The AR glasses that are still trying to find a footing, right? What is that killer app that's going to convince people to have one of these on them at all times, similar to a smartwatch or a smartphone? The price positioning needs to be less than your puck, your freebie that you have in your pocket. And you can't, for small companies like these, they're not going to be able to absorb the 10x memory cost increase if they want to
I
have
don't think it's
some
going to be 10x, but it's going to be 2 or 3x. It is what I heard.
I've heard up to 10x quotes from some people, especially at the lower volume scale for something like a 32 gigabyte eMMC. They are getting blown out of the water for what they're being quoted.
I can see that. I also have heard that like Apple is somewhat immune, at least for the short term, because Apple kind of buys in bulk and they've got long-term contracts and whatnot. So you're right. It's for a big company who's been able to control their sources of supply and have long-term goals. And there are companies who might say, you know what, I don't mind screwing a consumer for 3 years. If this goes bust, they'll come back. Whereas if you screw up Apple, they may never come back. So people are going to be more ginger on how much they jack the prices and mess with Apple. Yeah. Plus, Apple has long-term contracts locking stuff in. So yeah, it's going to affect the little guys more than the big guys.
For sure.
Yeah, another thing, and this one's really affecting I kind of threw this in there because it keeps coming up. I've heard it ever since Trump started doing tariffs. You can't have turning tariff switch on and off is a really disruptive to particularly these small companies. You're a company. When you're in the valley, you're just told, hey, go to China, get it made in China. Well, you go off and do that, and you live over there for months and years and do all that stuff. And then one day they say, oh, and by the way, we're going to put a big tariff on it. Why don't you move your stuff back to the States? Well, you can't do that. You can't. That's not a night switch. You can just.
We don't have the operators. There's just so much that goes into actually manufacturing these boards at this point. If you go into a manufacturing line over in Taiwan or mainland China, there's probably 50% PhDs sometimes sitting on the line there, babying some of the equipment that has to actually put all of the surface mount components down. That has to run through the reflow of it. That level of institutional knowledge just doesn't come across the Pacific overnight. And so regardless of your leanings on the political spectrum, and between the two of us, I think we cover quite a wide gamut, just uncertain tariff situations are going to destroy small companies.
It's bad for business. Yeah, you've got to these things. It's one thing if you think you have a policy, but boy, that policy can't change on a night. It can't change with every election and everything. Because if you do, the companies, the U.S. companies are going to get whipsawed. And
Well, I think we'd be lucky for it to be changing with just elections. It's changing with X posts on a daily or weekly basis
yeah,
sometimes.
yeah, yeah. It's very hard for companies to react to the kind of things that go on here. Yeah.
I think that does it for the big news items. We do have two little things that we want to tell the audience about. Number one is we have just received notice that Carl and I will be giving a formal display skeptics talk slash debate slash open forum at AWE this year in Long Beach on Thursday, June 18th at 11:20.
Yep. So we'll be there, and we're on a. They said a large stage. I don't know what that means, but we'll be on one of the larger stages. So I guess we're doing all right.
I
And
guess so, and we'll absolutely welcome any audience members who are going to show up to be part of the discussion and the debate. We'll have some basically coverage on hardware, software, but as we talked about today, some of the social implications of what AR glasses are going through today, because I think all of these are going to have to come together in a more harmonious way than maybe they have so far. The other thing that we want to highlight is teardowns. So some folks might have already seen that we've broken apart, at least at the Display Training Center, the Rokid glasses. These have been analyzed all the way down to the individual board component level, and we have a bill of materials estimate for people who are working in this space. This is more for company scale market research to understand kind of what the competitors are doing when they're making these particular products and what trade-offs they have from a cost perspective when they start including features or excluding them. So this is now live. Everybody can get 10% off with Carl's discount code if you go to the displaytrainingcenter.com/teardown page. But we're going to be doing more of these, and I think what comes next is very likely this nice little pair of Meta Ray-Ban displays that I've already abused quite well so far, but now we might take it one step further. But for anybody who has specific glasses that they want to see torn down and have a little bit more of detailed analysis with some industry feedback of component costs at likely component volumes, let us know. You can send an email to teardowns@displaytrainingcenter.com and we can put that in the queue.
Yep, yeah, and they're nice detail. It's like about 50 pages of stuff, and it has a detailed breakdown of the various BOM items where you've gone through, use your industry poll and whatnot to go through and get some reasonable estimates as to the cost of these things. I'm hoping to work with you on the next one. I don't know if that'll happen on all of them, but maybe on the next one, since I've done a fairly extensive photo study that I just can't cover on my blog. I've taken thousands and thousands of pictures trying to analyze stuff. Now, one thing I did do is I was taking pictures, both some very high resolution pictures, both with and without the display put in. I was taking like 400 megapixel images. These are big images. Yeah. So I could see down to the individual pixel level as to what's going on. And I got some interesting observations. So this one would be a little different that we would maybe combine on, because I've got a lot of the photographic evidence and you've got the BOM and the stuff like that.
Yeah. So look out for that one, hopefully here in March, later this month sometime.
Yep.
Okay. And with that, I think we're done for today. We'll move on to the second part of our LCOS versus micro LED series. Thanks again for watching, and we'll catch you in April again.
So that's just a little bit of background history. Now we'll talk about LCOS. LCOS is really kind of the simplest display in the realm. And the reason why I got into LCOS way back when is because it was really a computer chip with liquid crystal on it. So I was designing the backplane. The backplane is really bog standard, usually somewhat old, so inexpensive CMOS. And you just slather liquid crystal on it and you seal it by putting typically a bead of glue and just a minuscule amount of liquid crystal. This is one of the problems I think we talked about last time, that liquid crystal, if you look at it, you could fill like more than 10,000 LCOS chips with one television set, probably 500,000 of them.
Yeah.
One of the problems then gets to be, as a material supply guy,
you're not selling volume, which is a big problem. Volume.
So then how do you get in a liquid crystal company, and there's only a few of the guys who make these liquid crystals, how do you convince them to make you these really special exotic liquid crystals? Like we want faster switching, we want this, we want that. And these by the way, these things are like oil blends. They're they're blended. The liquid crystals have got all kinds of chemicals and ingredients in them.
Yep.
They got some secret sauce, and you're always trading. You're trading like speed versus temperature versus this versus that versus contrast and whatnot. There's a lot of variables in there, but it's hard to get them to, even though you're willing to pay, like you'd pay 100x. You're willing to pay 100x per ounce or per gram of this material because you use so little of it. That's one of the things in LCOS. The material costs are almost insignificant. The biggest material cost is the LCOS device itself. The trick in LCOS is yield. It really comes down to how, because this is a very thin gap. You lay glass on top of, you have your LCOS device, you have a layer of liquid crystal, and then you have on top of it, and then you have this little LC gap, and that's typically around 1 micron. Typically these days anyway, between about 0.7 for the ferroelectric stuff and about 1.1, 1.2 is about the most it goes to. So it's only a 1 micron gap, and it has to be extremely uniform. And then one of the tricks is how you fill this liquid crystal to make it so that, because it turns out crystal doesn't bend. The backplane will not bend; it'll just crack. Silicon wafers won't bend very well, but glass is a little flexible. You know, if you've ever pushed on an LCD screen, you'll see the colors shift and all. Well, you got that same problem here. If that LC bulges or sucks in a little bit, and you have to fill the liquid crystal at a high temperature, a fairly high temperature, and align it. And when you do that process, it's really hard to control that thickness, and that's one of the big tricks, because LCOS can be very uniform, but if it has a bulge or a sag in it, then you'll get different color. It'll show like we call Newton rings. You'll get Newton rings, or the colors will shift across it. So all the things used in augmented reality today use field sequential color, and so I won't be talking about 3-panel and stuff. LCOS, everybody's doing these things or field sequential color. You know, it's definitely the lowest cost micro display. When I say micro display, I mean on silicon, and we're talking small chips. They can use 12-inch CMOS wafers. It's, as I said, is bog standard CMOS you get. The only thing tricky in LCOS is the top level of metal. Other than that, it's really straightforward. The big problem is getting fabs being big enough as a company to get a fab to give you attention, to get the good process and all. They're usually way off state of the art. Even in a high tech, you still want to be in a 12-inch fab because they've been around for a number of years now, but you don't need to be at the smallest geometries. You don't really need that. Relatively speaking, ironically, it's almost a device with very few inputs, and the pixels are, each one is their own output, but they're at voltage, so you're outputting voltage, and that's really high voltage by today's geometry standards. So you tend to pick a geometry. You tend to want to go to a CMOS that's not absolutely state of the art, so you can save a lot of money on the process, because your very top layer where your output is, you got to be handling big voltages like maybe 2 or 3 volts. That's considered a big voltage. But anyway, but they can. A big advantage is they can integrate. This is what we saw with the Meta Ray-Ban display device and what was going on with Omnivision. God, they've integrated the frame buffer, the control, everything. So you can now up integrate, and this is a big advantage for LCOS over the micro LED guys. The micro LED guys are really struggling to get a match.
They're starved for area, on the chip.
Yeah, and there's a mismatch between the sizes of their wafers. The wafers that they make LEDs in are typically either 4, 6-inch, or some are doing 8 inches.
Yeah,
I don't think anybody's got a 12-inch wafer.
No,
and yielding that and making that and all. So with LCOS, all the volume and high yielding LCOS CMOS today is in 12-inch wafers, and that's a non, from a production and stuff, that's a non-trivial factor.
I would argue it's probably the biggest factor. Area equals production cost.
Well, LEDs are tough to yield too.
Yeah.
And anyway, so we got the small LED to eliminate, so we get good étendue. Nominally, we're talking 10x more efficient étendue wise than getting into a waveguide than an LED, and that's That's that crossover we talk about. The panel and controller power low because there's not a lot going on there. The biggest thing is as you try to go to higher frame rates, that could drive your power up. But then if you integrate it on the chip, that tends to bring it back down again, although it'll still be a little higher power. Because the only time LCOS device consumes power is when it's switching the mirrors, because when it's static, the rest of the time it's just a big capacitor. You just got a little bit of capacitive load on each mirror. Anyway, so it's you can do different resolutions. We can change the pixel size. I mean, when I first did my first LCOS chip, I think we did soup to nuts, whole thing, startup for about $1 million. We did the entire design, and I think our mask sets in the first run was like a couple $100,000, which is about the same price. Ironically, it was about the same price that it was when I was doing did the VDP, the 1918 in 1977. It was about the same price for my wafers there, and that was like 5-micron NMOS. So shows you what. So really, we were running very far behind state-of-the-art stuff at Cinia. Now I think Omnivision is running a little higher level technology now. They're leveraging both their fab relationship and their design capability with their camera technology. Anyway, but you can easily. This is another thing people talk about. Oh, lasers are brighter, or this is brighter. LCOS can be as bright as you want it to be. It's just how bright you make those LEDs. And their LEDs are more efficient because they're bigger. You know, if you make LEDs really big, they lose efficiency because they heat themselves. If you make them really small, you have the problem getting light out of it. Well, it turns out that the LEDs you end up doing for these LCOS illuminations are kind of the Goldilocks zone. They're at the size where they're at their most efficient. And if you notice, when we tore that thing down, there was no big heat sinks, no big anything, right? There is a heat spreader. There's a ceramic thing, but there were no like fins and all kinds of stuff to get the heat out because you're really in the efficient range of these LEDs. When I first did them, man, when I first used LEDs, I did LED illumination LCOS back around 98. And man, those things were hot because the LEDs today must be like 20 times the efficiency of what they were around 98. Anyway, and you can get resolutions up to 4K by 2K. Matter of fact, the interesting trend right now is the LCOS guys are saying, hey, we've been after 4K by 2K forever to do projectors and stuff. You mean you only need like low resolution?
Yeah. You only need VGA? We can do that in our sleep.
We've had 1080p for 20 years in LCOS.
Yeah.
And you know, the micro LEDs, they're struggling to do 640 by 480. So anyway, so the big problem, of course, is field sequential color breakup, and you've noted that. The big problem is that because the red, green, and blue are separated in time, your eye is jittering, your head is moving, the objects on the screen are moving, your eye is moving. All that stuff tends to create a problem where your eye will not integrate the three colors as one. And so, you know, the obvious brute force solution is increase the frame rate, field rate. Color field rate. So even if you're showing like 60 frames a second, keep the red, green, and blue behind each other. Keep them updated as fast as you can, so your eye doesn't have it makes it easier for the eye to make sure it puts it together right. Because what you're seeing basically is your eye getting images from 3 different places. So if you make those curve less apart in time, it not only is going to make the difference less, but it's going to make it easier for your eye brain system to put it together. There's also what I call head tracking and color field re-rendering, and Snap is doing that. Apparently, they had a paper presentation on that. But what they're doing is they're saying, okay, I'm not gonna. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna at the very end of my pipeline, right before I display the pixels, I'm gonna resample the other color planes. Usually, you'll go green. Green is, as we talked about earlier, green's what you see. Your resolution's in green, and your bright, you know, most of your nits are in green, so green always gets the best treatment. But then what you'll do is you'll go red, and then so you warp red, and then you'll put blue, and you can warp them to kind of match the green. And by doing that, warping or re-rendering, you can maybe reduce that breakup by giving an updated image based on what happened. But that's only as good as your MMU tracking and whatnot. And all. So the brute force approach is probably the better way. And this up integration, I'm optimistic that that'll help a lot too. Then the problem gets back to what I was talking about before with liquid crystal makers. Can you get a liquid crystal guys to give you the attention to give you better liquid crystals? Anyway, so it's lower contrast, typically 1,000 to 1 or less. 1,000 to 1 is probably good enough for glasses. Like I say, if you get much more than 1,000 to 1, then what you're going to find is your optics are going to start dominating your contrast problem. So usually good enough. Local dimming is being talked about using multi-LED arrays, but then you get into the issue of, well, now do you have an étendue problem? Do you have a light extraction problem? Because if you start making those LEDs really small, then they start to become inefficient. And so, but there are people looking at doing like arrays of mini LED or basically micro LEDs, but bigger than you'd have it in a display to do local dimming. That will help some if you have lower content, if you have lesser content on the screen, to reduce power, and it'll actually help with contrast as well. And then we're talking about there's people doing laser illumination, and that has some things. And then Meta's talking about doing like local dimming with laser illumination with the little switching pick chip. So we'll see. I still think that stuff's a few years out, but it's
a few is a kind estimate. I think that's a decade out easily. I said a few years is a kind estimate. I think that's a decade out. Easily.
Yeah, more than a few. But I don't know if it's a decade. It could be a decade. That's the same thing with micro. People say when are micro LEDs going to take off? Well, if I first started looking at micro LEDs in 2014, and now we're 11 years later, and they're still sliding out, and they were talking 2 or 3 years back in 2014.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's always tough to know when that'll happen. Anyway, it does require polarized light, and that's kind of a 60% light loss off the top. They do kind of make it up in the optics, though, because a lot of times they'll use mirror optics. Because of that, you can do these quarter wave plate thingies and switch the light and stuff. And with that, you can make up some of that. Some of that can be turned into space savings and whatnot. Let's say, oh yeah, I forgot that point. The illumination path is the big problem. Typically, the problem you have is you got to combine the LEDs together somehow. It's the same problem they've had with lasers that we talked about last time. You got to somehow take the red, green, and blue LEDs and combine them together. Now, one way to do it is to just put them together, but that's not as efficient sometimes. You can do a little better étendue if you break them up into. Usually, a lot of times they'll break them green on one side and red and blue on the other. The other thing is you've got this beam splitting prism. Typically, the most common way to do it, these engines with beam splitting prism, because you got to because it's a mirror, you have to come up with ways to get light in. The light's going to come back the way it came in. And so you got to come up with optics. And the most common thing is you use polarized light, and you switch it, and the beam splitter will let you come in. The LCOS device will change it, and then it'll send it out in a different direction when it hits the beam splitter. So anyway, and of course they're suffering, and I see this even from the LCOS companies. Micro LEDs are seen as the future. So it does hurt them in terms of should they put more money in it, how much should they invest, and whatnot.
Yeah.
I was just telling an LCOS company, I said, I think the future's maybe a little further out than the micro LED guys want you to believe. But a lot of these guys are experimenting with I've seen it with Rantec and others. Mm-hmm. They're all experimenting with micro LED stuff too, because they've got the backplane technology.
Right.
They're CMOS companies, really.
And there's going to be applications for both, but for this particular application, which one is better, LCOS versus micro LED? Still to be seen.
So this is the classic thing we talked about with field sequential color. This is an actual picture through a HoloLens showing it. But the basic idea is you do red, then green, then blue, and you put them together. But if your eye puts it together wrong, you'll get the breakup. And this is kind of what you end up seeing. And unfortunately, your eye emphasizes it. If your eye sees something weird, it tends to bring it to your mental attention. That's why it's worse than you might measure it to be.
Yeah.
And this is what we measured on the micro. This is a Meta Ray-Ban display. They're only doing 90 hertz, which is kind of low. Most people are 120 hertz when they do this. This must have been some compromise made with the cameras and everything else they were doing, because the device itself would support 120 hertz. And I'm expecting that to go up. I was doing things as much as 2 or almost 3 times that when I was at Cindy, and that's a 2011 when I left. So, and this is, of course, from your earlier videos about how you would see the color breakup.
Yeah.
And how
It's
you
there.
test it on camera. So this is
But-
with the Ray-Ban displays again.
Yeah, I think you pointed it out. Your eye and your own oculomotor system will maybe overemphasize this when you see it in person. For me, it's very, very jarring because I'm just not used to field sequential color, right? I have more experience with direct emitters on LCD or OLED. But once you maybe spend a little bit of time with it, you can kind of get used to it, and it doesn't jar you as much.
90 hertz is kind of slow. I mean, you'd like to be a lot faster.
Yeah.
Another thing that comes up, and I won't get in too much into this, but you can get LCOS also has a thing called lateral fields. I kind of show it here, but you see, the problem with lateral fields is are supposed to go. The LCOS is designed to go. The liquid crystal is designed for the fields to go straight across it from the mirror, which is an electrode, to a common electrode, the ITO coating. But it turns out if you have an on mirror next to an off mirror, well, the electrons would rather go to the nearest path, and they tend to go sideways to the nearest mirror. You got to remember, these mirrors might be only 3 or 4 microns across, and this gap is 1 micron. So this is somewhat the scale, So you got this problem of mirrors going, and you can see that not only can you have field lines going that way, they can also go the other way. And one of these ways is generally fairly negative. It can kind of cause problems for liquid crystal. And you do see, like if I look here, if you look at this thing here, this A here, you see how the gap kind of closed up. You see how the black pixels are a little bigger. I took this through a microscope.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of see how the black pixels are bigger than the white pixel. And that's where these lateral fields.
You're partially switching the liquid crystal in the off pixel.
Yeah, and you can actually get into problems, although most of these have been solved. You get a thing called tailing. What's happening is you get what they call a reverse tilt. That's really bad stuff. One of these two is going to make the liquid crystal, because this is twisted pneumatic. It can make it tilt or turn in a direction that's unnatural to it. And what will happen, it has to then rotate way around, and it can get stuck and take time to get unstuck. It is a temporary effect. But you can't have this thing called tailing, or they call it mouse tails, because what happens is it takes time for that liquid crystal to come unstuck. It's not a permanent effect. The other thing that I didn't talk about here, but the other thing we do that big problem for all liquid crystals that I know of require what they call DC balancing. What happens is if this field, let's say I drew this thing, let's say I was just going to drive a solid display, I'm never going to change it. So these mirrors are staying the same all the time. You get what they call ion migration. There's always some ions in the liquid crystal material, and they will migrate to the other side. And you may have heard of, it's been mostly solved these days, but you hear about people having sticking, like LCDs would burn in, and you can get a soft burn in. It's not usually a hard burn in, although it can be, depending upon how it gets trapped on this other electrode. But what happens is you get ions migrating from one side to the other, and they will tend to make the material, you'll get an image stick where it'll kind of inhibit, those ions will get there, and it'll keep the material from working properly, and you'll see a latent image if something was on there a long time. The way to avoid that is we call DC balancing. So what happens is, even though you may think this is a solid image, actually the image is going up and down, up and down. It turns out that TN liquid crystal is magnitude sensitive, but not sign sensitive. So what you do is you hit it with if you wanted to hit it with, if it was a full black and white, you just hit it with a square wave, and as long as it's above and below. So really, normally this voltage, and oftentimes you do it by controlling the ITO electrode. So what you do is you move the ITO electrode up and down, and then you move the mirror the opposite way, because the mirrors are usually on a set voltage, and usually you can set this ITO voltage to either a positive or negative value. And so what you do is you set it below, and then above, and then below and above. And by doing that, you DC balance the material and keep those ions from migrating to one side or the other. This will come a little important later. We're going to mention ferroelectric, which has a different problem. So anyway, snap spectacles is one of the latest out there. This coloration is really more a function of the waveguide. We'll see how they come in the future. this is really fairly old waveguide technology. But look, they're looking at displays of 1,000 by 1,400. I think they've got pixels in reserve. This is probably like a 14,000 by 14,000 display, and they probably are using the rest of those pixels for IPD adjustment. Anyway, but they're getting to really high resolution. The pixels it's pixel sharp. You can see if I do these 1 pixel lines and whatnot, I can see them when I magnify that image. And as I talked about, Snap is also doing this thing of late stage reprojection or warping, where they warp the color planes at the last minute, just to show you it's there. We're seeing 120 hertz as commentary, so you can go to higher field rate to break it up. And I think we're going to see them at least going. Meta ray band display is kind of low at 90. 120, I think, is kind of a bare minimum. That's actually red, green, blue twice, or something we talk 360 fields. 120 times 3, and you'd like to be more than that. I've done things at 540, which is 540 fields. So you're getting 3 copies. That's like 180 a second. So anyway, this is Snap. Remember I talked about those lateral fields? It's interesting. If you look at these things really up close, I don't think I've got that. If you look at this really up close, the white lines are a little thinner than the black lines. And this is because I got a little bit of a lateral field. As a matter of fact, you'll see like the points disappear, whereas this is actually a Loomis thing I shot, and it's much more balanced black to white. So it's just a different point in time. But this was taken like 3 years before that. So anyway, it's just interesting that I see things from my LCOS days. Then the other one, there's another LCOS out there that doesn't get talked about as much. Mike had talked about more, particularly in the context of near eye displays, is ferroelectric LCOS. It's typically switching speeds are like 10 to 20 times faster than TN speed. So it's pretty fast. Some people they sometimes position it as being between DLP, which can switch really fast, but it's binary. It's typically more binary. Typically, when they switch this stuff, they binary weight the pulses. They don't really do the analog. Whereas when we digitally drive liquid crystal, you actually take the ramp. The material is switching slower, but you can take that ramp and you use that as your dark as part of your equation of how you set your brightness. Anyway. So they have an advantage. They can do less field sequential breakup possible. They also have an advantage that they can keep up, and you have less judder and stuff. If you're having motion and stuff, if you have any kind of problems with field rates, you can get the field rates really high. Now, what they do is they can kind of break it up, and what they'll do is they may not display all the color depth at one time. They'll break the color depth, they'll break it up, and you break it up over multiple periods. DLP does this as well. You may kind of break it up, so you may not get the whole color depth in one little sample, but you get the majority of it. And particularly you don't want big MS bits that are real big and long. You make the MS bits, you break them into multiple pieces and display them over multiple frames. And maybe you only display the LS bits over some of these fields. And by doing that, you can reduce that. And this is a way to break up another way to break up field sequential color breakup. So they don't have the lateral field issue. It's a different liquid crystal thing. Has a smaller cell gap. So that's actually good for making smaller pixels. You have less of this lateral field issue too, because the cell gap's smaller. But it has a DC balancing problem. The reason why you haven't seen more FLCOS is because of DC balancing. The problem is, and by the way, I've driven FLCOS, I've driven TN, I've also driven band. That's another LCOS. Tends not to switch as fast, so we don't use it as much in field sequential color. VAN is really super high contrast. That's what you use in the high-end movie projectors. That's Sony XXRD stuff and stuff. It really uses VAN, but that's a whole different subject. Most of the stuff we use is TN. But FLCOS, the problem is when they DC balance, that thing about trying to keep the ions from moving, it is sign sensitive. So that when they DC balance, they get a negative image when they DC balance. So what they have to do is they have to turn the LEDs off half the time. Basically, you display half the time, you turn them off half the time while you're DC balancing. If you didn't, you would just get gray because the image you would get half the image each time. So you get a negative image when you DC balance. So what they do is they turn the LEDs off while they're balancing, and that's the downside to it. That's why it never took off in front projection. Front projection is just a killer. You couldn't afford to throw away half your light for DC balancing. So, but in the case of LEDs and illumination of this stuff, turns out with LEDs, a lot of their limitation is heat. That's the part, another thing people don't realize. But one of the things that limits LEDs' brightness is the heat. Well, if you let them cool, if they're cooling off and they get to cool, that's another thing with field sequential color, you can drive the LEDs a little harder because they're cool. Each LED is cooling while the other LED is driving. But here, when you're DC balancing, the LED can cool too. So you're able to drive them a little bit harder than you otherwise would because they're off. So you gain back a little bit of that in the field sequential color. And when you're doing AR, well, we don't need like a pico projector started at 10 lumens, and they're nowadays you're getting 50 and 100 lumens and plus. Whereas as you measured a near eye display, you're talking maybe a 1 lumen. So you're talking to needing huge amounts of light. I'd like to just mention C-Real. C-Real is famous for working on light field displays. They're working on near eye light field displays. But I think they've decided, it looks like they've decided to go a little more near term, and in developing their stuff, they started with DLP, but then they switched to using ferroelectric LCOS because of the high field rate. I won't get into all the tricks of how their light field works, but basically they do field sequential light fields. They have light coming from different directions. They're also already using laser illumination. We got that put in.
There you go.
And so what they do is they've built their own MEMS array that they have a MEMS array that will shift it. So they do their collimation of the light, of the FLCOS collimator. They have their FLV tilting, and what they're talking about being able to do is do tiling field of view. So what they're able to do is basically they're saying, I'll put an image up here, 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 and here. So rather than make a bigger chip, they can take one chip and shift it optically with a MEMS device. They can shift it around and plant out and basically build. It's not quite a foveated display in the sense that it's moving around. It's not moving around with the eye. They're not trying to track the eye or decide where to put the resolution. You get the full resolution of the whole image, but they basically tile out one panel and do it multiple times by using that really high field rate.
Interesting.
So this is basically applying a bunch of stuff they develop for doing their light field and saying, well, is there a way to get something a little closer and nearer? So this is something they're doing, and they've got a white papers about that. I saw one on LinkedIn and stuff. So they're going public with this. Okay, now we got something that you and I both know and love.
Played around quite a bit with.
Yeah, this is the Omnivision LCOS. This is from the teardowns and stuff we talked about last time. The point I want to emphasize here is that étendue thing. Look there's the actual LED. Oops. Yeah, let's see here. There's the green LED, that little tiny gray spot there. And then I'm not sure which is, I think the dark one's probably blue, but I could be wrong. But there's the red and the blue LEDs. Those two little tiny dots there. This is the collimating lens. Notice how big that collimating lens is compared to the little tiny LED. And then look at the LCOS device. Look how big that LCOS device. But that doesn't really factor in much because, as I said, that's going to act like a mirror. So then it's going to get put back down into that aperture hole. What really controls the whole game of étendue is the size of this LED and the ability to make a big collimation. You can really collimate that light, and when you're trying to get that into the optics. This shows a two-way combiner, but as we know, the Meta Ray-Ban display used a 3. Oh, I do want to give an update on this engine. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit ahead of myself here, but I did want to give an update. When you analyze it, I think your room and what you put it in was about, you had a room that was give you about 7 or 8 feet of throw distance. Well, it turned out that wasn't close enough to infinity for us. So you've shipped me the projector, and I went into a large room, and from about 27 feet or 3 meters, 3 meters? No, yeah. From 27 feet away. Yeah, I about there. I projected it on a large screen, and actually I had to put some paper down to get a much smoother surface. I have some really high quality matte photo paper. I like to use it because it turns out a very good screen, and I'm actually able to see the mirrors. So I think the lens, and you can see the individual pixel mirrors, hopefully in the eye and up here. This is the enlargement. So I was actually able to project it big enough and from far enough away. It definitely is sharp. So I'm starting to think that most of the blurring problems are the fact that the meta is the software scaling everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's really almost all software scaling more than it is anything optically. So how about an apology due to Gore-Tex? I think the engine's pretty sharp. It's not a tiny engine. There's smaller engines out there, but it's doing a pretty good job optically. Better than I thought. Yeah, this is another thing. I looked at all. By the way, what I was doing here is counting pixels and trying to find out exactly. This is for sorry, for a WhatsApp image. Unfortunately, there's no way to just drive in an image into the glasses. So I was trying to see if I could find what the resolution was of the WhatsApp image and load a WhatsApp image in. And so I was counting pixels to see exactly what resolution are they trying to do. Unfortunately, no matter what I did, and I've stepped through a whole bunch of different in the ballpark. So I counted pixels, I stepped around, I tried different size images, and none of them ever comes out perfectly. Like here, I said, well, there's about 237 and half the display. So that should be 4, so I've tried all kinds of different resolutions and sizes and whatnot. No matter what I do, you kind of get this rolling thing where the number of, if I put 1 pixel wide lines in there, they always come out different. Like this is this one and that one. If I go from this 1 pixel wide line to that 1 pixel line, they still get blurred. So the software is constantly manipulating stuff. Anyway, so this is the engine. We've talked about this in depth, but that's Gore-Tex engine. Basically, the big part of the engine, as you can see, though, and this is a conventional LCOS engine, a big part of the engine in all LCOS is really getting the light combined together. You got this big lens that's collimating the LED. That's really, the LED behind it is really tiny, but you got to collimate the light, and then you got the beam splitting cube. Those are the two big bugaboos. And what's happened is they're finding ways to compact out this projector unit. So there are innovative. So yeah, that's basically a diagram of what's going on there. What we talked about last time. This is the Gore-Tex engine. This is what they use for most of their other stuff. But
the big difference for the Gore-Tex engine, right, being that they have the all primaries on the same chip. They have the RGB LEDs.
Chip. These engines, to make them even smaller, went to a single chip. I imagine they're not quite as bright, but this is their 1 cc and 0.7 cc LCOS engines. Now, what's interesting, I used to think that this mirror combination here was unusual, but in preparing for this, I started to say, well, what's Snap doing? Turns out they're doing pretty much the same thing as Gore-Tex. They have a two-way combiner. They have a green LED and a red and a blue. And they have a multi-lens array. That's an homogenizer. Relay lens. I have a lens in front of the projector. And oh my goodness, there's that same little mirror thing. They don't say in their patent, this is from one of their patents, they don't say they have a quarter wave plate, but I'd bet dollars
it's got to be on that 222.
There's no way to reroute the light back out, so that got left out in their description. But then, and then they have another lens, so it's very, very similar to what.
I mean, it's interesting, right? This is the same problem that you pointed out earlier, that you're putting the illumination path in the path of entrance of the light into the pupil, and so they must have.
And you have to have good
really
I think they don't say what this is. It wasn't even labeled, but I think that's a pre-polarizer.
Yeah. Well, it has to be.
You have to be very good here, because if you mess up, you're going to get a ghost image through here. I was impressed with that engine. You actually got two problems, because you got a problem here of a straight path. You also have a problem with this path because you're coming in and out of here in the quarter wave plate. That's all got to be perfect, or you get another problem. So I'm surprised, but it turned out both of these companies
seems to work pretty well,
and it seems to work more than adequate. Yeah. So there are more innovative things out there. This shows almost nobody uses an X cube, but this is just the drawing that Avegant showed. I think this is from an Avegant slide. But this but
Nobody in
normally
LCOS,
does
at least.
acrylics.
The micro
What?
LED guys. Nobody in LCOS uses the XQ, but in the micro LED space, they're all gunning for it.
Oh yeah, that's a different thing. They're combining the actual displays. I'm saying nobody uses the X cube in the illumination. Yeah,
right.
But Avagon's got a tricky way where they've got they call it a waveguide combiner. And what's neat about them is they actually end up combining the light and shooting it down the projection lens and back out. And by doing this, you'll notice they don't really have a beam splitting prism. Basically they have a projection lens, but the way they're doing this to eliminate the beam splitting prism. Now, Magic Leap and their architecture went even more one level more, because the goal is to eliminate they're trying to eliminate the combiners, the combining of the LEDs, and you're trying to eliminate that beam splitting prism. So basically, this gets its big size advantage by eliminating the beam splitting prism and shooting the light in and out of the LCOS down the projection lens. Part of the optic kind of enters in the middle of the projection lens optics. And then Magic Leap, what they did is they actually have the LEDs on one side. I don't know exactly how they're doing this because they've got to do something to modify this. But what they're doing is they're putting they're actually shooting through their waveguide, hitting the LCOS, and then entering their waveguide. So they don't need a beam splitter. They're literally illuminating at a slight angle into the LCOS and then going into the waveguide. So they're doing something tricky there. But because of this, they end up with very little. They do have some optics in here. And I don't know what they got a polarizer and stuff. And I'm pretty sure they got to have some kind of collimation. There's stuff not shown here. This is just from their diagrams. And we have other types of things, like Loomis's stuff is pretty tiny as well. They've done a lot to get that size down. These will grow though with panel size. You got to make your panels. At some point you can only make the pixel so small, we get into diffraction problems. Another problem making the pixel too small. So your pixel gets smaller. At some point, your resolution. But the LCOS device inside a Meta Ray-Ban displays is not very aggressive. I think, what did we say they were? Like 3.8 microns?
Something, yeah.
Yeah, I think they're a pretty large pixel. They're going to be going down to like 3 or maybe even 2.5. So as they get that so they can go to a higher resolution without making the display much bigger. If you start making the display physically bigger, then all this other stuff has to grow. And it tends to grow three-dimensionally because it's got to go X, Y, and Z. So anyway, yeah, I've always talked about this already, so I won't belabor this too much other than to say that Meta is doing a lot of work. This is a really good paper. I've got the links down here. They've got a couple of really good papers, one in Nature and one in, I don't know, ARV, another organization. But they've got a couple of good papers on this. So that's where I got these figures from that really go into it. They seem to be making a really serious effort here to do this laser illumination stuff. Continue on. Like I say, they're actually showing pictures of images and showing them doing stuff. They've got this. I think I see laser speckle in this one though. This is actually a published paper by them. So they're doing real stuff though. It's starting to look like this is not
the investment's going somewhere.
I looked at their laser beam scanning stuff. It all looked like simulations.
Yeah.
But this is saying somebody's in the lab doing real stuff. Yeah. So anyway, Vitra Labs, they've been doing this laser routing stuff, and I heard about it before I heard of the Meta developments. But then I imagine Meta's, as I always say, if you can dream it, Meta's already tried it. But anyway, so Vitra Labs has also been working with a company called Brilliance. Brilliance is doing a laser combiner. And so what they've got is a single chip that integrates like the drive and all kinds of stuff. So they can integrate the laser beams into a single beam. And they've been working on that with LCOS companies. So they can actually combine the three lasers into a single beam. And they're also working with Vitra Labs on doing laser illuminated LCOS. So even like I said, initially I think they were primarily focused on laser beam scanning, but I think they found that, they ought to be looking also at laser illumination of LCOS as well. Okay. And with that, I think that'll end our discussion on LCOS.
The very short introduction to LCOS.
Introduction to LCOS, yep. That was the short part of the presentation.
Exactly. Now we get into the real meat, which is micro LED, and how close are we